Good morning. Jesus tells this scribe, he says, you're not far from the kingdom of God. He didn't say you're there. He didn't say you got it all figured out. He said you're not far, because we continue to strive to follow the commandments of the Lord. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, strength, and soul. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And so there is a subordination, right? It's not one rule that kind of makes the golden rule. There's these two, the first and the second. And really, we can't have the second without the first. We can't love our neighbor as ourselves unless we first have been able to submit ourselves to the love of God, to love Him with our soul, mind, heart, and strength. So to love Him with all of our being, to love Him with our intellect, to love Him with our heart, to love Him even in our emotion, to love Him with our spirit, to love God completely, to have completely decided to live my life for Jesus Christ. Not in a partial way, but in a complete way. And it's only then that I can love my neighbor as myself. And Lord, who is my neighbor? Right? We think to the Good Samaritan. And so we are called to love everybody, which is really difficult sometimes, right? It's really difficult to love people that hate us. It's really difficult to love people that despise us. It's really difficult to love people that want to nail us to a cross. But that's the commandment of Jesus, is to love your neighbor as yourself, to be willing to lay down our lives for the sake of others. And so we recognize in this commandment that Jesus calls us to a profound love. He calls us to a radical, completely new way of thinking of love. Right? No more are the days of a tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye. But rather to turn your other cheek. To love your neighbor as yourself. Which makes no sense if we don't first have the love of God. If we don't first understand the self-sacrificial love of God. If we don't understand the laying down of one's life, then of course it makes no sense to love those who hate us. But if we can subordinate that love to the love of God, then it makes a lot more sense. And if we can do that, then we too will not be far from the kingdom of God. But of course, we have to continue to strive to be ever more faithful, to grow closer and closer and closer to the kingdom of God. Today's the feast day of St. Norbert. He was a bishop and founder of the Norbertines, an order dedicated to the proclamation of the gospel. It's through the proclamation of the gospel that we encounter the love of Christ. It's through the proclamation of the gospel that we're able to recognize who God is and why we ought to love Him, because we recognize His love for us. And so in our own lives, we too are called to be preachers of the gospel. We're called to proclaim the gospel at all times, in season, out of season. To each and every day proclaim God's love for us and for others, so that we may love God and we may love our neighbor as ourselves.